What'll you do to start sounding more native-like? Let's use contractions. This is Jeff with Fluent American again, and today we're talking about a strategy that can immediately make you start sounding more native-like in your speech. That's related to something native speakers do, and that's something that people learning English tend to avoid, and that is contractions. Native speakers are using contractions all the time in their speech, whereas a lot of times people learning English either don't use them or don't use them enough to make themselves sound natural. And again, if your goal is to sound native-like and have people take you for a native speaker, at some point you need to use contractions in your speech. Now, we have mentioned contractions before, so in this video, we're really going to just be focusing on one common situation, contractions that appear with the word you. We're going to be looking at contractions involving V sounds, L sounds, D sounds, and a couple others. So let's get started. Contractions with Ds. These are going to occur when you have like a modal verb like would or could. Also with past perfect, like for instance when you have had in situations like that. Also, of course, just the simple past with the verb did. Who'd you meet? Who'd you meet? Notice when you have these D sounds before the Y, it's going to make almost like a J sound. We see this like in judge or bridge. J, J. Who'd you meet? Who'd you meet? You could also not reduce the U and keep it as a U. It's like, who'd you meet? Who'd you meet? But it's very common to reduce it. Who'd you meet? Who'd you meet? Notice that the U gets reduced into a Y. Where'd you go? Where'd you go? Again, J. J. Where'd you go? Where'd you go? How'd you do? How'd you do? So again, all these contractions using D's before the U's. And again, it's just going to make you sound more natural. Instead of saying, how did you do? It's much more common to hear, how'd you do? How'd you do? Or where did you go? Often just becomes, where'd you go? Where'd you go? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's look at some contractions now with Z sounds. So for instance, where's your car? Where's your car? Notice instead of where is your car, it's just where's your car? Where's. This is like that j sound that you see like in pleasure, or like fission. Where's your car? Where's your car? How's your friend? How's your friend? Instead of saying, how is your friend? How's your friend? How's your friend? When's your meeting? When's your meeting? So instead of saying, when is your meeting? When's your meeting? When's your meeting? You also can have contractions with V, typically with the present perfect, like have. How have you been? How have you been? Notice that via, how via. Instead of how have you, it's just how have you been? How have you been? Where have you traveled to? Where have you traveled to? Again, where have you? What have you done? What have you done? Instead of what have you done, what have you done? What have you done? Also contractions with the future. So for instance, your L's. What'll you have? What'll you have? What'll ya? What'll ya? So again, instead of what will you have? What'll ya? What'll you have? What'll you have? Where'll you go? Where'll you go? So instead of where will you go? Where'll you go? Where'll you go? When'll you leave? When'll you leave? So instead of when will you leave? When'll you leave? Last, negative contractions. So we're going to be using not in front of the U. And in these cases, those TU sounds are going to sound like ch. CH sound like you see in choose, or cherry. Don't you like it? Don't you like it? Notice instead of don't you, it's more don't you, or don't you. Don't you like it? Don't you like it? Shouldn't you call? Shouldn't you call? So again, shouldn't you instead of shouldn't you, more shouldn't you? What you doing? What you doing? Instead of what are you doing, more what you doing? What you doing? So again, combinations where you have that T before a Y, it's going to make that sh sound. The goal is to start sounding more native-like, start feeling more comfortable with your speech, then these are definitely things that you need to start incorporating. For For more information about contractions and other sounds, be sure to take a look at our other videos. Also, don't forget to subscribe.